What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be somewhat reviewing Chapter 3 and comparing it to the previous two seasons and explaining how I rank them. If you guys do enjoy this video, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, and comment down below what you would rate Chapter 3 out of 10 and how you would stack rank all of the Fortnite chapters. So I'm going to start off with what I think this chapter did well, because there are actually a lot of things that Chapter 3 did pretty well. First of all, I don't think there was any exceptionally terrible seasons. The last season, season 4, I think is the weakest season of Chapter 3, and the map wasn't very good, but a lot of that kind of just has to do with it being the end of the chapter. It seems like the end of chapter seasons always make like drastic cataclysmic changes to the map to kind of set the stage for the event and set the stage for the next chapter, the new map, whatever. So season 4 I think was the weakest, but other than that, there was no terrible seasons that I think were just bottom tier or like F tier seasons, like how you would kind of look at season X of chapter 1, the primal season of chapter 2. This season, or this chapter, I feel like was very consistent. Seasons 1, 2, and 3 I think were all above average. Season 4 was a little below average, but there wasn't anything that was like terrible. There also wasn't any huge delays for anything this chapter, which is another good thing. There was a consistent like steady flow of content and updates, and we didn't really just get into any of those like really long delays like we saw at the start of chapter 2 with chapter 2 season 1 and 2, where the seasons just dragged on for really long and there weren't any updates. And like I just said, there was a consistent flow of updates throughout pretty much every season. There was kind of a lull or a dead point in season 3 when Epic were on break for summer, but it's not the biggest deal, and that was kind of like a planned break. It wasn't like we just randomly got left to dry and the game wasn't updated for like months on end. And I think in chapter 3 this is a good thing that there was collabs that actually had a positive impact on gameplay. The Spider-Man, the Dragon Ball Z, and even the Rocket League collab. I think all of those items being added to the game were fun and exciting. Some people complain about the Rocket League car, but I think it's really balanced and it's really easy to destroy. And the same thing is true with the Dragon Ball Z collab. People complained about the Kamehameha being overpowered, but I thought it was really easy to play against, and more often than not, you kind of had to opt into dying to that item. You could just relocate while they're in like the charge up animation, and then it wasn't going to be a problem. So I think overall the collabs this chapter were pretty good, and they actually had an impact on gameplay, which is different from how it was in chapter 2. There was a lot of collabs in chapter 2, but more often than not, they just didn't affect the gameplay. I know in chapter 2, season 5, I think it was, I wasn't playing the game at the time, but this was the season which the content of the season was just like different collabs and different skins coming to the item shop, and there wasn't really many meaningful gameplay changes as a result of that. So I feel like the way they did the collabs in chapter 3, I think, was really good, and it was also a lot more memorable. People are going to remember the Spider-Man season. People are going to remember the Dragon Ball Z season a lot. And then also in this chapter, we got the addition of Zero Build and several new movement mechanics like sliding, sprinting, mantling. I think all of those movement mechanics are good and like really positive for the game. And then Zero Build itself is a nice game mode to have, and I feel like it solves a problem that Fortnite has had for a really long time, because the skill gap in build mode was so large. It was very difficult for new players to get into the game or returning players to get back into the game. And it seemed like the solution to that was usually just to put overpowered or busted items into the game that kind of ruin it for everybody, like the mech, the Infinity Blade. But now with Zero Build, you have a more new player friendly environment, or just for people who were never interested in building altogether, it's a great place for them to play. So I feel like regardless of how you feel about Zero Build, if you hate it and never want to play it, it's still a positive for the game to have it, because it does make it easier for new players to get into the game, and it does just bring a whole different group of people into Fortnite who previously wouldn't have been interested in it. So that is the positives for this chapter. There's probably others, but those are the main things I wanted to highlight as far as what chapter 3 did well. Now we're going to get into some of the negatives. The first major weak point of chapter 3, I feel like, compared to previous Fortnite chapters, is going to be the holiday events. I feel like these were all pretty underwhelming. So many players complained about the summer events' lack of content, especially when it had kind of been built up as like the major significant thing to happen in season 3, and then it was just kind of nothing. The Halloween event was not as good as other Halloween events, but it wasn't as bad as the summer event, in my opinion. It was just kind of there. A lot of people wanted to see the Witch's Broom return. It didn't happen. The main thing they added was the Howler Claws, which were just kind of meh. And then I believe they were even vaulted for a decent portion of it. I think the Grim Gables map change was good, but the Halloween event just didn't feel as good as previous Halloween events in Fortnite. It also didn't feel as bad as some of the Halloween events. So it's just kind of mid, I feel like, in that regard. And then the Winterfest event, I honestly don't remember what happened during this. I don't remember it being that big of a deal. But it's kind of hard to gauge community feedback on the winter event because Epic does give away free stuff in the Crackshot's cabin, and it's mostly just like sprays and emotes and pickaxes and gliders. But ultimately, if Epic gives away free stuff, people are going to rate it highly regardless of the like gameplay significance it has. You give people free skins and they'll be happy regardless if the update didn't change that much in game, and I don't really remember what it changed. So the Winterfest, we're just going to assume it was good because everybody thinks it was good. I just don't remember personally. So the Halloween or the holiday events were kind of lackluster this chapter, I think. I think the loot pool was also always bad. Especially for build mode, it wasn't as bad in zero build, but we had a spray meta for pretty much all of chapter 3. Season 4 did vault the Stinger SMG, which had been insane. We had like the combat SMG, which was insane. We had really terrible shotguns at the start of chapter 3. Both the striker pump and the auto shotgun had to be buffed several times before they were like decent. And then we also had ARs like the MK7 and the striker burst rifle, which went into first person mode and made it very consistent to just fry people across the map in ways that you hadn't really seen in Fortnite before. So I feel like all of chapter 3 had a spray meta except for season 4, but even then we had the burst, the Evochrome burst, which is insane at getting shots through build, and the goo gun in the game, which just obliterates builds as well and oftentimes gets splash damage through build. So I feel like the loot pool was always underwhelming in chapter 3, and there wasn't very many like traditional iconic Fortnite weapons that returned in chapter 3. There was more Star Wars items that came back into the game than actual Fortnite weapons that came back into the game throughout the course of chapter 3, which is pretty wild. Or like the Star Wars weapons came back more frequently than any sort of traditional Fortnite weapon. So that's really, really disappointing. And when you combine that with the holiday events, typically for like the summer and winter events, they would do these 14-day events where they would unvault a different weapon every day for that day, just for one day. So like one day you might get on and play with the Deagle, the next day you might get on and play with like the burst assault rifle, the next day it might be the tactical shotgun or the combat shotgun, and each day there would be a different item for that day. They didn't do any of that in chapter 3, and when you kind of combine that, making the holiday events underwhelming, and then the fact that the loot pool was always just kind of not great, it's weird that they didn't just do any of those 14-day events for any of the holidays and kind of make everybody happy, because the biggest complaint that I've seen through all of chapter 3 has just been people missing like traditional Fortnite items like the Scar and the pump, and they even teased it in the Collider event and it ended up not coming back. Another kind of negative for this chapter, I think, is there wasn't any like significant map changes until the end of the chapter with like the chrome and the balloons changing POIs. But even then, a lot of POIs that got affected by chrome or got lifted up the ground by the balloons, they didn't really change that significantly. We had the reality tree changing the map during season 3, but even then, it didn't change the map significantly. It wasn't like we got a new POI replacing an old POI. It was like they would change the houses at Sleepy Sound to like pirate-themed houses or Coliseum-themed houses. And then same with the houses at Condo Canyon. But it didn't feel like a new, unique POI because it was just changing like the textures of how certain houses looked at certain POIs. So the map changes were really underwhelming this chapter. This is kind of somewhat negated by the fact that this chapter was much shorter. But if you compare the map changes that we had in chapter 1 and how that map changed season to season, compared to how the chapter 3 map changed season to season, super disappointing. But this map was only made to last a year, so it's not as bad. If we were going for 2 years on this map, it would be really stale by the time we get to like March, April, May. Like a year and a half without many map changes is not ideal. So the map change aspect of this chapter was really underwhelming, and that's what makes Fortnite to me, honestly, the way the map evolves and changes over time. But overall, I think I would give this chapter like a 6 out of 10. It wasn't terrible. It was just really kind of meh the entire time. There wasn't any like incredible 10 out of 10 seasons, I feel like, but there also wasn't any like 3 out of 10. So it's just very consistent and very average all the way through, which sounds negative, but like that can be a good thing, you know? Chapter 2 had some incredible seasons, but it also had some terrible seasons. Same with chapter 1 to an extent, with season X just being garbage. So I would give this chapter a 6 out of 10. It was above average or slightly above average pretty much the entire time, except for season 4, which Season 4 being the end of chapter season kind of shapes it differently, and I feel like Epic kind of treat that season differently because they're more so setting up for the next chapter than anything else. So 6 out of 10 is what I would give it. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you would give this chapter, and the way I would rank them would probably be chapter 3 in the middle. So I think chapter 1 was far and away the best chapter of Fortnite. Nostalgia aside, like, sure, a lot of it's nostalgia, but also part of it is just the way we were all kind of learning the game together and the way the game developed and changed over time as the players improved, but also the consistency of like updates and content and map changes in chapter 1 has been unmatched by any Fortnite chapter since. Each week there's pretty much a new item. It wasn't a Star Wars Wild Week every chapter, or who knows, whatever Wild Week every chapter. There was actual like content updates every week pretty much, and a lot of map changes throughout the course of the chapter. If you look back at how the chapter 1 map changed over time, just completely different than how the chapter 3 and chapter 2 maps were handled. So I think chapter 1 is the best. Chapter 3 I would put in the middle at second best. We just talked about it. And then chapter 2 I would put as the worst chapter. There were seasons in chapter 2 that I think were better than anything in chapter 3, but there was also seasons that were much worse, and the amount of delays early on in the chapter I think really hurt it. Both season 1 and 2 I think were really good seasons if you just look at them without the length of it. Like, they were solid seasons to play, but them lasting 120 days each, or more than 120 days, was really detrimental, and it just really made the game stale and boring, even though those seasons I think would be pretty solid seasons had they ended on time. I think chapter 2 season 2 would be a top 3 season of all time if it ended on time. I didn't play it, but I know chapter 2 season 4 was incredible. But there was also seasons like chapter 2 season 5, which was just kind of nothing. Chapter 2 season 6, which was the primal season, which I think a lot of people regard as like the worst season ever. So chapter 2 goes in last, but it did have some redeeming qualities. It just wasn't as consistent as like chapter 1 or chapter 3. But that is going to be it for today's video. Remember to give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more from me. Comment down below what you would give chapter 3 out of 10 and how you would rank the Fortnite chapters. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.